A decade ago, you were definitely one of the first people to call out that science wasn't progressing as fast as it had in the past. How has that paired in the last 10 years since you've kind of been famous for making those statements?
Yeah, I think I started talking about the tech stagnation probably around 2008,
Okay, so even earlier.
and the claim is that it's been it's been slow for at this point running on 5 decades since the 1970s that we've had limited innovation in the world of atoms. When I was an undergraduate at Stanford in the late 1980s, it was a mistake to major in anything having to do with atoms, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, nuclear engineering. Aeroastronaut were just terrible decisions. And then the only thing that really worked were the world of bits, computers, internet, mobile internet, software. To some extent, electrical engineering was still okay, but really, computer science was the one place where there continued to be this cone of progress around computers. And we can debate, how big that was. It certainly was very, very unbalanced, and it certainly, I think it led to some great companies. It's debatable how much it improved the GDP relative to what we'd seen, say, in the first half of the 20th century in the United States or the other developed countries. So I broadly think that we've had this broad stagnation in technology and science for something on the order of 50 years.
Is the stagnation accelerating? Is it decelerating? And now there's a new wave. Where do you feel we are in that stagnation continuum?
I think in some ways we are roughly in the same place we've been we've been for the last quarter century, where there's a decent amount of progress in the world of bits. We had an enormous internet wave in the late 90s. Maybe the late 90s were early. Maybe we're now late in the internet, but that was a giant thing in computers, and we now have the start of some sort of real AI wave, even though it's been talked about in some ways for decades. But I think the LLMs, ChatGPT, it's probably a breakthrough that's I would rank as on par with the internet itself. It is very big, and so I think in this world of computers, we can say that the progress is continuing at in fits and starts, but at still a pretty decent pace. And then it's everything else that's been much slower, much harder to invest in, much harder for much less than advertised, and much further from the science fiction future of the Jetsons.
You made an argument in your piece on the new criterion that kind of wokeness is that smokescreen for the lack of scientific progress. Can you unpack that a bit?
Well, there's a lot. It was sort of an anti-woke and anti-woke argument I was making, where I think there are endless debates we can have about DEI, wokeness, political correctness, multiculturalism, all these topics, and on some level, I think they're important. On some level, I would advocate for certain views on them, and I think the debates are important to have. And then on another level, I've come to worry that so many of these debates are distractions. It's like a magic show where we're being hypnotized and we're paying attention to a certain debate. We're not seeing the man in the orange monkey suit jumping on the back of the debate, something like this, and that diversity is a diversion from more important things. And the more important things can be questions of economics, questions of science, question of religion, maybe even other political issues. The economics one, just to rattle down the list real quick, the economics one is just, cultural Marxism. The Marxist critique of cultural Marxism is that people took when they started focusing on race and gender, they forgot about class, they forgot about the real economics, and then there's a Marxist or libertarian critique where you could say that we've had just runaway housing prices, and that's the real problem. We should be figuring out how to build more affordable housing, and that as long as we're talking about these other categories, we're not even going to be wrong, not even going to be in the zone of dealing with that problem. And
it used to be that like the downtrodden were agitating for maybe better wages or better working conditions. Now it seems like some of these movements are about things that are other than economic. Could be some of the things you mentioned or the environment. Well, is that also a smokescreen?
Well, I don't know if it's, I don't know how conspiratorial you would get. There's a Marxist conspiracy theory of history where it was wokeness was a conspiracy by the corporations to divide the workers into race and gender and pay them less. And I think there are various companies that executed on something like that plan moderately well. There's Walmart in the 2000s was always in the doghouse because it wasn't paying its workers enough. And they came up with the idea of rebranding themselves as a green corporation, and that sort of split the left-wing anti-Walmart alliance. And then, in effect, it was cheaper to do a little bit of green stuff than to pay the workers more, and it was sort of it was probably good for the Walmart shareholders, and then was also in some ways didn't really address some of these underlying economic challenges. And I suspect there's something like that that's also gone on with the question of science has been very obscured, and so that if you think of it in the context of the universities or the schools, the wokeness tends to be focused on the derangements of the humanities curricula and English or history or topics like that. Whereas if the thing that's really wrong is that the scientists aren't making any progress, they're not inventing new things. It's all sort of this corrupt peer-reviewed research. It's incrementalism. It's sort of it's a stagnant Malthusian sociopathic institution. And to the extent the humanities are distracting us from sciences, we're not even paying attention to. I'd be fine with a little bit of wokeness if we were finding a cure for dementia or doing other things like that.
And is there some sort of structural reason why like science is not progressing fast enough? Is there something like or is it just like all these 1% things that all add up?
I always think why questions are difficult. They're somewhat overdetermined. There probably is some effect where certain fields have, the easy things have been found, and it's hard to find new things. It's probably very hard to find a new element on the periodic table. Or it's hard to, you're not going to be like Christopher Columbus and find a new continent on this planet. So that, certain fields get closed and get fully developed over time. But I'm on the whole more inclined to sort of cultural explanations, that it's not that nature has run out of things for us, but that there's something that's changed in our culture, that we've become too risk averse, that things have gotten bureaucratized, that I think one dimension that I do think is a fairly important one in the 20th century is that there was a great deal of science and technology that was used in this sort of military context, and at some point, the scientists and the engineers are just building more powerful and more dangerous weapon systems. And already, I think World War I, it's all this carnage. It's sort of ambiguous. Is all this science really more good than bad for humanity? And then certainly 1945 with at Los Alamos and Hiroshima, it somehow I think tilts us into a somewhat darker direction. And there's something about the history of nuclear weapons where, in my telling, it's a sort of delayed response. It takes something like a quarter of a century for it to fully sink in, but by the early 1970s, it's like we can destroy the world 20 times over. What are we doing? Does this make any sense? And then, maybe we shouldn't be funding the smartest physicists to build bigger bombs. Maybe we shouldn't be funding any of the scientists. Maybe they all need to be regulated. And it's kind of sad for these people to be, puttering around with lots of grant applications and filling out all sorts of DEI forms. But maybe that's the price you have to pay to stop them from blowing up the world.
And it does seem like some of this correlates with just like the moon landing, like which is this like incredible feat. And then it just seems like things started to slow down like right around that time. Is there something in the psyche like, oh, like it's kind of like mission accomplished, like we can just now slow down?
The history is complicated. There were a lot of things that happened, but I think there was it was possible to accelerate science and tech through centralization and government funding. So even the Manhattan Project, the New York Times editorial a week after Hiroshima was something like, hope, if you left this to prima donna scientists who are decentralized, sort of an anti-libertarian argument, it would have taken them half a century to come up with a device. Instead, the army was just telling people what to do. It organized the scientists, and they were able to bring this invention in 3.5 short years to the world. And then in a way, you were able to repeat this sort of centralized, coordinated, pouring in lots of money approach with the Apollo program. And, Kennedy, early 60s, gives us the speech. And by the end of the decade, we have a man on the moon. But then I think the longer term cost was that you created these very large bureaucratic institutions. You no longer had the innovations that were coming in that you could then scale, and somehow it became politicized, and it slowed down a lot. So there was some, I don't know, I'm not sure Faustian bargain, but some kind of a trade-off between you could accelerate one time, but then you get a scientific. It's like in agriculture, you can increase food production by having some monoculture, but then over time, it's probably not the healthiest ecosystem.
When you're dealing with atoms, like there's a lot of safety problems, and if you think of even do you think of early NASA, there's a lot of people that died. There's a lot of even test pilots on the side doing stuff, and is that like safetyism? Has that come in to kind of slow innovation?
Sure. I mean, it was I think Yuri Gagarin, the first cosmonaut who circled the Earth 6-7 years, maybe a decade later, died in some test pilot. So
yeah,
there was sort of a crazy amount of risk taking, and without making any judgments about it, I would say that there was something that shifted away from that. It just felt too dangerous, and it was too much risk of nuclear war. It was too much risk of environmental degradation. There were just too many crazy things people felt could happen, and I don't want to dismiss these existential risks, but I do think that the trade-off is that we've resulted in a society that was locked down not just during COVID, but we've been in a soft lockdown for something like 50 years. And my bias is always we need to find some way to get out of the lockdown.
And how do you know when to where to draw that line? Like if you think of like not long after some of this scientific progress started slowing, we mandated seat belts, and then you mandate bicycle helmets, and then you mandate helmets when you're skiing, and in many ways, like these things are good. They protect people and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So how do you know how far to go? There's some sort of like Laffer curve of how far you go on the safetyism side, right?
Yeah, it's always hard. It's hard to articulate the kinds of places where it feels like we've gone too far, or where it's gotten it's sort of gotten hijacked by various rackets. I think we've gone too far on the safety side with real estate, where it's runaway NIMBYism, extremely strict zoning laws. And I'm looking out of my window here in Los Angeles, and it's all these office buildings that were built in the 60s, 70s, maybe 1980s are the most recent buildings. I cannot see a single crane anywhere on the horizon. It's just, and that tells me we've gone way too far in something as relatively important as as real estate, and then I do think on the biomedical side, which is an area that I've thought about a lot, and always think, and it always strikes me we could be doing so much more. There's so many approaches that seem quite promising, and then it is the barriers are just very, very high, and I think we're scared of the things that can go wrong, but we're not scared enough of the things that will go wrong if we do nothing.